At long last, we're happy to be able to finally provide you guys with hard proof and dispel some misinformation surrounding the classic Halo track High Charity Suite, specifically the section titled Pursuit of Truth. If you're already familiar with Pursuit of Truth and Leela, you can skip ahead to the timestamp shown. If not, let's get you up to speed. After Halo 2's release in 2004, the internet resonated with discussion of its iconic soundtrack. However, fans were quick to take note that many of the game's motifs were not present on the original soundtrack. Fast forward a bit, and 2 years later, Halo 2 Volume 2 was released in order to expand on the music that was available to the public and plug some gaps that the prior volume had created. This second volume contained a piece called Pursuit of Truth. It can be found near the end of the track High Charity Suite. Following some analysis of this second volume, some interesting discussion surrounding Pursuit of Truth reverberated through the Halo music community, when comparisons were drawn between the piece and a much older melody from Bungie's earlier 1994 first-person shooter, Marathon. The Marathon track in question is called Leela and was written by Alex Seropian of Bungie founding fame. Immediately, what seemed to rise to the top of the conversation was this narrative that Pursuit of Truth was somehow based on or made in homage to Leela. After all, Halo is no stranger to Marathon references in its art and themes, and Halo's composers routinely reference their past works from prior games. Consequently, discussion also shifted to cover the fact that, if this was true, the piece was not an entirely original composition by Marty O'Donnell. Let's listen for ourselves. Here's a comparison between Pursuit of Truth and Leela. The two pieces share several chords and are written in the same key of music. Despite this, their cadence and progression differ enough to clearly differentiate themselves as separate compositions. That said, these connections were the predominant narrative in the community forums and online discussions that were being had for years. You couldn't even mention Pursuit of Truth without this idea permeating the conversation. Fast forward to 2022, in conversations surrounding the piece earlier this year, Marty O'Donnell said that this supposed Marathon callback was at best unintentional. He ultimately claimed that the piece was written for a commercial sometime in the 1990s, and that he had not listened to the Marathon soundtrack at the time of Halo 2's production. So there you have it. Truth, but without proof. Unfortunately, this revelation didn't travel very far, both in part due to the nature of conversations had on Discord that were later atomized, and also because some found it unbelievable that the composer hadn't listened to Marathon's soundtrack in the decade following the game's release. However, we're here to set the record straight. In 1999, Marty O'Donnell and Michael Salvatori gave out a sampler CD that contained some music that they had created for some commercials and games of the era. The CD was titled Music for Games and contained the 1999 Macworld Halo theme in addition to tracks from Myth the Fallen Lords, Myth 2 Soulblighter, Myst, and Septerra Core. Commercial jingles were also included, as the CD showcased work that had been done for Kemper, Nintendo, and OshKosh's TV spots. We obtained a lossless rip of this CD from Alex Gumpel, who can be found on twitter.com/anelf3. From analyzing those files, it was discovered that these TV spots contain the earliest known version of the piece known as Pursuit of Truth. Let's have a listen. Here's a direct comparison between the previously unreleased Kemper, and Pursuit of Truth from Halo 2. If you'd like to hear the uncut track in its entirety, I'll include a link to Atlex Music's channel where you can find this track and other similar goodies from Bungie's past. So, about setting the record straight. This track's discovery immediately does a couple of things. Firstly, its mere existence definitively proves that Pursuit of Truth was not written for Halo 2's soundtrack and was in fact repurposed, corroborating Marty's narrative. Secondly, it adds some interesting points to our timeline of events. Neo, from the Odyssey project, pointed out to us that this demo uses samples from the Proteus family of synths. These synths released in 1993, and the disc was made in 1999, meaning that the track must have been created at some point in that 6-year time frame. Marathon released in 1994, meaning that for 5 of the 6 years in this creation window, Marathon's soundtrack would have been around for Marty to listen to. To be objective, you should also know that Marty formally joined Bungie in 2000, 10 days before the company was bought by Microsoft. So, up until that point, he was just operating under a formal business collaboration between Total Audio and Bungie. However, if there was ever a time when Marty would have had ears on Marathon's soundtrack, it would have been during this period. To follow that, let's listen to a direct comparison between Kemper and Leela from Marathon. Once again, they share the same keys and chords, but the linked nature of the tracks is really going to be ultimately decided by you. So, to wrap this up, let's end with some definitive statements on what we can say for certain. We can verify that Pursuit of Truth is not an intentional reference to Marathon, or its track Leela, in the same vein that Halo often references the franchise, because the track was originally created for use in the Kemper TV spot. Unless they were trying to link an unsuspecting TV ad to the Marathon universe, it seems clear that we can finally put this part of the discussion to bed. However, we cannot exclude the possibility that the track created for Kemper's TV spot was inspired by the track Leela in an out-of-universe contextual sense. It's simply impossible to know for sure if Marty had played Marathon before 1999. In conclusion, this track's existence corroborates the validity of Marty's public comments and finally dismisses some speculation surrounding the origin of this classic Halo track. Hey guys, now that the video's over, I'd like to take a second to talk to you about kind of the state of this channel and what's been going on. If you've been paying attention in the communities where I'm primarily involved, you know that it's been kind of a tumultuous few years. I'm trying to currently find the motivation to continue making content, and this is kind of a step in that direction. I'm also currently doing a lot of assisting with other people's work. If you know me, you know that I primarily work on other people's content, and that's where I find the most value in providing my services. So I'd like to point you to 2 specific channels that are going to showcase some of my work in the future. One is Atlas Music, or Owen Spence. I know most of you are already familiar with Owen and his work. Lots of just excellent stuff in the pipe that I'm going to be contributing to coming his way. So go to that channel, subscribe, hit the bell, do whatever you'd like to do to be there for when that stuff drops. And then I'd also like to redirect you to Promethean Archival Minds channel, which, if you are a Halo fan specifically, it's going to have some awesome stuff coming up in the future. So if you could give those places a look, that would be awesome. There will eventually be more content on this channel, but I'm being very specific with what I choose to do and what I choose to upload and what I choose to offload. So, it's hard to tell what the future holds, but I appreciate you watching this far. I'll see you guys next time.